The Virtual Curbside is a production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Utah AAP, working together to improve children's lives through education, advocacy, and networking. Hi, this is Paul Wirkus from the Utah AAP. Welcome to this week's edition of the Virtual Curbside, where we bring pediatric providers together with subspecialists to get smarter about all things pediatric and better acquainted as a community of caregivers. The Virtual Curbside is brought to you in part by a generous grant from Primary Children's Hospital. Primary Children's Hospital, the child first and always.
Welcome back to the Virtual Curbside. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to meet with Angelo Giardino. We do this about once a quarter when we have an extra week in the month, and it's always nice to get together and have a book club. Angelo, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks. I really appreciate the invitation. I will say I bump into people when I walk the halls at the hospital, and they do listen to this. So to our listeners, thank you for listening and sharing your insights after you listen to the podcast.
Yeah, feedback is always great. As a matter of fact, today's book is a result of some feedback. The ever delightful Lulu Waterhouse sent us a list of books to think about, and we chose this from that list. And it's kind of nice to be able to get outside what we have been reading.
Yeah.
I should also point out that this episode is the last episode of our 7th season of Virtual Curbside. Starting next week, we'll be starting the 8th year. Who would have thought?
Congratulations.
To all of us, right? So our book this month is The Self-Driven Child, 2018 book, subtitled The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives, written by William Stixrud, PhD, clinical neuropsychologist, and Ned Johnson, who's the founder of Prep Matters, a tutoring service in Washington, D.C. I should point out they've collaborated, as far as I could tell, one other time, wrote a book in 2021 entitled What Do You Say? How to Talk to Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. Those all seem laudable goals, I think.
Yes, very much so.
Good. What'd you think of the book, Angelo?
I thought it was a really good read. There's a lot of common sense. Both of these professionals work with kids and families who are trying to get their kids to perform academically. I think they spend a lot of time helping kids think about standardized tests and what testing to take and how to do better in school. So I think they have a lot of practical knowledge, and their framework, I think, is really based in common sense. So I'm anxious to talk to you about that.
You know, it's interesting because I think it builds on similar themes to a couple of books we've talked about in the past while, but takes a slightly different direction. I wanted to point out a couple of things from the introduction. Notes that we find ourselves in a time of increasing stress and anxiety with lower levels of internal locus of control, higher levels of external locus of control. And then they point out that there are some fundamental false assumptions. I'm just going to list these so that we can use this as a springboard. The false assumptions are that there's a scarcity of opportunities for success. Kids have to learn to be competitive from early on. Second, that success in life depends on success in school, and you either need to learn early to succeed or give up. Third assumption is that pushing kids harder helps them be more successful. And the fourth is that the world is more dangerous than ever before. Kids need constant supervision. Those all sound like sensible thoughts to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple threads there that I think we'll pull on during the episode here. But to your point, Paul, this book seemed to me to be a very common sense, practical application of some of the stuff we learned about in the anxious generation when we talked about.
Right.
So I did see some themes kind of emerging. So whenever professionals, when they write, start kind of honing in on similar themes, that must be something that has some evidence to it. That must be something that has some truth and reality to it. So I thought this book was confirmatory, but it has a lot of practical steps to it.
Yeah, it does. Any themes in particular stand out for you?
One that I wanted to start with is I loved how they have a whole chapter about the battle that parents have with kids' homework.
Right.
And, you know, like every family that I know that has kids in school invariably end up in this homework dilemma. Like, how much pressure do you put on the child to do their homework versus how do you motivate them to want to do their homework so that they learn something? And then for the kid that really is fighting, how do you not make this the battle royal every night, which then makes everybody living in that house miserable? And I think they have a really nice way of navigating through that. And it just felt like it was so real, so practical, so relevant that I think anybody that's in pediatrics, if you just read that chapter, you're going to have a little bit of a toolbox to talk to the parents.
One of the most famous quotes from the book is, "I love you too much to fight with you about homework."
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
which is a fascinating thing. Another one of the quotes that really stood out to me is that parents can't force a child to be motivated. You can't make them want what they don't want.
Yeah.
Which is a great insight, I think, and also potentially terrifying for parents.
I think coming from that chapter on homework, then they start developing this theme that runs throughout the book of parent as consultant to your kid.
Right.
And
Be a
I
consultant,
really,
not a manager.
I love that idea because, and again, I love these two guys, the authors, like the way they give their examples. Like, I would have loved to have lived in a house with those two as adults because they're so responsive and reasonable. I just love hearing like how they would talk to the kid. But this idea of the parent as consultant and you coming up alongside of the kid and, depending on their developmental ability and their cognitive ability, really kind of laying out their options for them and helping them make a good decision so that then you're not fighting with them, but you're figuring out what decisions they are starting to understand are in their best interest. And there's just something about that really resonates with me because it seems like it's positive and constructive and growth oriented. I think about when we did Dweck's book on the growth mindset. There's really a way to incorporate this, I think, in some reasonable, relevant framework in your practice or in your home so that you can get the parents out of the business of cracking the whip and, literally just being miserable trying to get their kid to do their homework.
Now, here's a thought. The people that you're talking to right now, the pediatric providers of all sorts, you're talking to people who have been high achievers in their lives.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a difficult thing for high achievers to wrap their minds around in talking to parents about what it means for their child to be an achiever?
Yeah, yeah. That's another one of the threads I think we can pull on. So I think what he's trying to, or what the two authors are trying to do is the trick here, that truly the developmental process that we're trying to link into here is that the parent needs to somehow get the kid to start understanding what's important to them and how these things that are important to the parent are part of what will help the kid get to where they want to go as they grow and develop. So I think they have a balanced message. Like, you have to allow the kid to have enough psychological safety to figure out what things they like to do, what they like to spend their time on, and then connect that to the responsibility they have to be a student in school and to perform at a certain level. And then where the boundary or the threshold is, and he gives some examples. There was one parent that said, I will only be happy if my kid gets into Harvard, Brown, Yale, or Columbia. Yes, okay. Do you really need to introduce that into your family? Is that really a good thing for the kid to have? That is the only thing that's going to warrant them getting love from you?
And his response to that was so interesting. Is, number one, is that where all of the successful people in the world went to school? And number two, then he looks at several university presidents and looked at where they went to school and found that that's not the only path. I think the thing that's empowering is that the right path is the right path. And that's the tough thing, that helping a kid discover what it is they love and what motivates them is most likely to give them ownership over doing what they want to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a couple chapters where they give a lot of good examples of how, I think, with all the right and good intentions, parents over pressurize the importance of getting a 4.0 in high school.
Right.
Which then, develops kind of like a dynamic in that family of, over pressurization, stress, lack of joy. And what I like is they take a step back. It really connects to what you do in motivational interviewing, what you do in cognitive behavioral therapy, where you try to get the frame right. And then you step through a process where you, first of all, have to accept the fact that if you screw up on one test, your life is not over. You will be able to rebound. And like, I think he talks a lot about like plan B thinking
Mm-hmm.
and helping kids understand, performing at a high level is important, and it's important to you. It's important to me. And I want to help you do that. So I want to be your consultant to get you there. But sometimes if you have a focus or a kind of just limited set of goals, you might not achieve those. And that's not healthy for anybody to have such a narrow thing. So there was one kid who, for whatever reason, she said, unless I get into Columbia, I will never be successful. And his challenge working with the child and the parents in that situation was to really start thinking through, let's do some plan B thinking. Let's say you do well in high school, but for whatever reason, you don't get into Columbia. What else would you do? And then they started going through, there's a lot of schools you could apply to. And what you'll probably do when you're in high school is visit some of those other schools. And great, if you apply to Columbia and get in there, great, wonderful. But let's do some plan B thinking. What about if you went to the University of Michigan? What do you think? And then it turned out like somewhere in this, I think they did a visit to University of Michigan, and the student loved the
Loved
university.
Ann Arbor. Yep.
It was a great town. Actually, she liked some of the curriculum there better than the one that was at Columbia. So it was like this aha moment. Like, you have to be able to provide your child with the sense that some things will work out, some things weren't. It's important to work hard, but don't get so stressed about only one thing can ever give you joy, because in life, that's not true.
One of the things that really stood out for me, this a story you may remember about the young man who's failing high school, doing terribly. It turns out his parents are both university professors. And he says, well, why don't you drop out? And he said, what? He said, why don't you drop out? And you can go to community college. And after a certain period of community college, you could transfer. Your high school curriculum doesn't mean anything at that point. And as they talked about it, the light really went on for this kid. And he started looking into it and realized that really to do what he needed to do, he needed to do a little better in high school. And so suddenly he was more motivated to do well in high school. And his sister, who was a much higher achiever, said, wait a minute, what is it he's doing that turned the light on in his head? And I thought it was great.
Yeah, it's examples like that. I think they do a really good job at also bringing in that other thread, which is, kids' obsession with digital media, the stress that brings into your life. And that's where I think the anxious generation piece comes in. And I thought they had some really appropriate ways of talking that through with the kid. And because Stixrud is a neuropsychologist, I think he brings in some really unique ways of talking to kids in a developmentally appropriate way about their brain development and, kind of how for some kids, they're just more excitable. And he had a really nice way of, I think, helping kids talk through, in our word, like how they could self-regulate a little bit better. But it kind of talks in a very developmentally appropriate way so the kid understands there are ways to kind of calm their brain down so that they can perform better on a test, or then they can focus on something a little bit differently. And I think a pediatrician would just eat that up in terms of some really useful vocabulary and examples of how to help the kid understand when they're getting dysregulated and then the negative impact that's going to have. So a couple of the examples that he uses, and again, I would love to know these people, but like this one kid just get out of control. And he had a really good way of helping the kid understand how to get control. And in this one case, it was just interesting. They made a deal that I guess they had a dog somewhere in the office.
Yeah.
It was really helpful for the service animal or the dog to sit next to the kid when he was trying to take the neuropsychological exam, and it got him through the test.
Yeah. This is a quote I pulled out. Kids need downtime and unstructured play. It's not a luxury. It's a neurological necessity.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that the anxious generation pointed out is kids need unstructured play. They spend a lot of time talking about even more, as you point out, more structured downtime in a way, is mindfulness techniques. And I know that Dr. Stixrud is a great proponent of transcendental meditation. which I know very little about, even having grown up in the 60s. But they really do point out that's something that we have to do, is learn how to be able to unplug and unhook.
And, to your point, the other book I think that kind of gets full, the Nature Fix, when we did that,
Yeah.
this idea of restorative time. And they call this out, but some parents get really irritated if they see their kids like doing nothing. And they talk a little bit about it's important to daydream sometimes. Like that's actually restorative. And sometimes kids just need to do what they want to do and not, be doing something quote unquote productive, because their brains do need some downtime. And to your point with the meditation, I think one of the kids, there's a couple quotes that the kids have, but one of the kids liked doing meditation because he said meditation calms the mind and it calms the mom. And I just thought, and this is like a 14-year-old. So it was a cute little play on words there. But what I think he was trying to say is the whole family learned how to do meditation, and it just made their family life so much more pleasant and peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that they spent a lot of time talking about sleep. This is a big theme for me, because I think that we don't do enough to encourage good sleep.
Yeah. I mean, I think they did a beautiful job at talking about the restorative nature of sleep and how we have to be understanding of the need for sleep, and then how that incorporates really, I think, into good pediatric practice.
Yeah. Yeah. One great thing they said is that their advice to somebody who was studying hard for an exam is very frequently an extra hour of sleep is going to be more beneficial than an extra hour of study.
Yes.
And I think that we generally come to the conclusion that if we've given it our all, that means that we have sacrificed everything, including sleep, to study just a little bit more. And I think their point is that we can't function appropriately if we're not sleeping appropriately.
Yeah. And to get back to your point of a bit back, the people we're talking to in this podcast are all high achievers and whatnot. And I think they spend a chapter or two talking about readiness for college. And the fact of the matter is some kids, for whatever reason, are just not mature enough or developmentally at the point that they can take advantage of starting college right out of high school. And I think they really walk folks through a way of thinking about the phenotypes of different kids, and is going to college, away from family and the structure that was in high school, is that really good for the kid we're talking about? And they really go through, are they at the point that they can regulate themselves? Are they disciplined enough to balance the social with the academic? Can they take full advantage of that? And there are alternatives so that we don't neglect the fact that readiness for college is something that we should pay attention to.
They make a great point of saying that for a lot of students, a gap year can be absolutely invaluable, learning to live independently. And, a point I make to my patients a lot of times is you have 13 years of lockstep where people tell you not only when your next vacation will be, but when you can use the bathroom during the day. And I think that there's a great potential then. And again, back to sleep, I often point out to my patients that college is one of the most flexible times to have in your life. And people generally sleep more dysfunctionally in college than at any other point in their life. And it's largely because I can do whatever I want now and haven't really learned how to regulate, but this is what I need.
Yeah. Yeah. And they do a great job. So I just kind of feel like chapter by chapter, I was just really engaged and pulled into this. And then they're very good writers, and they just pepper enough humor in there. Like there was this one scenario where I think there was some tension between like a 16-year-old daughter and her father. And the father was quite focused on her career development and, was she going to perform well in adult life? And finally, she said, I just don't have the mind of a 45-year-old man. So I got to think through as a 16-year-old. So you're killing me here.
Right. I think we've alluded to this, but I think making it explicit is fairly important because it's really important to them. This is another quote I pulled out of the book. If we want children to develop resilience, we have to let them experience setbacks while they're young. There's a power in failing sometimes and understanding that it's not the end of the world if you do badly on a test or if you don't make the team or some other thing that seemed like it was the absolute end of what you needed to do.
Right. And that's where that plan B thinking comes in, because, they have a really good way of helping the family use those opportunities of where there has been maybe a misstep or a failure in a way, not to beat the kid up, but to kind of help them grow and learn. So, I mean, I could probably talk another hour because I just love this book. So
It's a good book. Yeah, it was a good book. And, I think that when we say plan B, I think a lot of times we think of plan B as well. If I can't get the right thing, then I can do this instead. Their point is plan B is probably the right thing.
Yeah.
That finding that thing that puts you into a flow state, that's the key.
Yeah. So I loved it. So I really encourage the audience to get it. I think you'll really enjoy it. And obviously, like you said, these are all child-serving professionals. You're going to just love this because it really gives you some tools.
And so you'd recommend it to your colleagues, you'd recommend it to parents, you'd recommend it to casual readers.
And I recommend it to some high school students. I think they would actually learn something, the ones that are like to read.
100%. And if I did recommend it to a high schooler, I would recommend they read it with their parents.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
have
that
a
they
little
can,
book club.
they should have a little book club. Do you know what they should do? I think once a quarter, they should choose a book.
Yes.
And talk about it with a friend.
Like us.
Just like us. Thanks a lot, Angelo. And thanks to Lulu for recommending the book. It's nice for us to be able to get out of our usual flow. Thanks for our listeners for listening. And we always appreciate the feedback. And Angelo, we'll probably talk to you in a couple of months.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks, Paul.
All right. Thanks for everything.
Thanks for joining us. We look forward to getting together again next time. The Virtual Curbside is available on iTunes or wherever you find your other favorite podcasts. Be sure to like us and subscribe. We want you to like us both because we're needy that way and because that will help other listeners like you find us. Check out our website, vcurb.com, for supporting materials, schedules, and other great stuff. The Virtual Curbside is an educational production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The opinions expressed in this podcast, while carefully considered, are ultimately the opinions of the presenters and not necessarily of the American Academy of Pediatrics or our employers. And remember, the content of this podcast shouldn't be seen as a substitute for seeking actual personal medical care. If this is an emergency, hang up and dial 911. Otherwise, schedule a visit with a caring healthcare provider to try to get to the bottom of your concerns. None of this could happen without Elisa Stoddard, our extraordinary executive director of the Utah AAP. Many thanks to Tim Cosgrove for his help on the website and logo design. Thanks to Phil Wirkus, who composed the theme music. See you next time.